Joining us now to discuss human trafficking here on the Suncoast is Captain Corinne Stanish of the Criminal Investigation Division at the Sarasota Police Department and Dr. Brooke Bello, founder and CEO of More to Life. Thank you all for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
A tough subject to discuss, but something that we need to discuss because it's a growing problem here in Florida especially. And Brooke, you started More to Life because unfortunately you know firsthand about human trafficking. So can you tell us a little bit about your story?
I think that what some don't understand is that being sexually violated as a child or being raped is definitely 95% of victims of human trafficking, prostituted individuals are. And so it was no different for me. I was brutally raped at 11 by a friend of my grandfather's. I ran away from home. Straight A student, athlete, was picked up off the street by a trafficker and a bottom girl who I thought was a nice couple, took me out to eat, and then torture began, and I was their property after that.
And how long did it take you to get out?
The uniqueness about trafficking, it's never sort of one time because they trade you around, but the process for me was several years before I discovered who I was again.
Wow. And Captain Stanish, how much have you seen this problem grow here in Florida and right here on the Suncoast?
Well, addressing what Brooke was saying, her story is the backstory that law enforcement never really took into account when we were trying to arrest our way out of the problem with prostitution. So it's like the problem is not only growing, but it's starting to evolve and change where we're starting to understand the root cause of the problem and change our tactics so that we could start saving lives instead of just re-victimizing the victim.
How did you start to make that change from looking at it as a crime of the person who's involved in the prostitution as more of a victim?
Education through organizations such as Sailor Freedom, More to Life, victims, talking to these women, and just starting to put it together. And law enforcement is certainly not the expert in this arena, in this field, and it took these outside agencies to come in and say, you guys have a human trafficking problem. And at first, law enforcement was initially saying, well, no, we don't. We don't have, people coming in cargo boxes and things. We were thinking that typical, stereotypical human trafficking definition. And once we started realizing what it really was, it's exploitation, it's victimization, and it kind of dawned on us that, yeah, we do have the same problem. It's what we were calling the victimless crime, a vice crime, and it's not.
And Brooke, you mentioned some of the risk factors, but what is the most common thread you see among all of these victims of human trafficking?
Wow, I mean, coming up on Father's Day for us, fatherlessness is at one of the main root causes. That's why traffickers and pimps are able to manipulate girls and young boys. You call them father and daddy for a reason. Men are the biggest buyers for every one individual that's prostituted or sold on a given night. There are 7 to 40 men or couples who will purchase that individual. So it is demand that drives supply. And men are the biggest part of the problem because 95% of the buyers are men, and they will be the biggest part of the solution for sure.
So how do you get in and start to get these women to trust you and come to you for support?
It's almost just like Helen Keller. Her teacher, Anne Sullivan, was deaf, was blind. Because of all that, she understood what it took to be restored and to transform. I understand it very well. I have a neck up experience, but also have a neck down experience, so I can speak their language in a way that gives them a safe place to fall, in addition to us having our restorative justice and demand education. So for any individual male that is busted in our county or Manatee County, they have to go through More to Life's 8-hour course. And that is such a restorative justice piece for victims that's incredible.
Definitely. And Captain Stanish, in Rebecca's piece that we saw, it must be very tough for families and parents. Estera's mother trying to frantically search for her. What can parents do to help prevent this and to look for the signs?
I would say that have constant communication and talking with your kids, because it doesn't matter what type of family you come from. I don't care if you're upper middle class, poverty level, it doesn't matter. Anybody could be a victim. The only classification required, right, is to be a human being. Yeah. And good, you're in, you could be in. So I think parents need to really have that conversation, and especially knowing that the internet out there. It's unbelievable and sickening how prevalent these websites are, how they're out there recruiting, victimizing, trying to get these kids in for modeling jobs and things like that, parties. You just have to have these ugly conversations with the kids to teach them what's out there and be aware.
Absolutely.
And what do you see as the biggest threat when you meet with these families? You see what kind of started the trend for them getting into this? What did you see as kind of the impetus?
Victims don't know that they don't know that they're victims. 65% of victims come through the foster care system. Over 50% of trafficking happens online. Kids today think that someone on their Facebook or Snapchat is actually their friend, when most of those individuals are there sometimes to lure them away. And so I think fatherlessness, drug addiction, parents that are addicted, mothers who were trafficked or raped never got the help they needed. They can't identify it in the lives of their children. One of the biggest things we work with federal law enforcement is boyfriends, stepfathers, familial sex slavery violating the child, and the mother not recognizing it. Child's like, well, I'll just leave here, because pimps and traffickers look for manipulated kids to violate even more, because they're looking for someone to love.
They're already the most vulnerable.
That's
correct. And then they're violated again.
Right.
So how do you all look for victims? How can you spot someone?
A lot of times, at least from our perspective, one of the easiest ways is when we're doing our stings and operations. That's the given. But with training these officers, we have to get them to recognize the vulnerabilities when they're handling calls and things, for them to look for signs, to look to see if there's abuse situations, because like the numbers you were talking about, these are abuse stories. These are abuse cases that we didn't discover, we weren't able to help, we didn't know about. So the abuse starts in the home, and they're usually running away, trying to fill that void of that father, like you're mentioning.
Yeah.
And these exploiters become the air that these victims breathe, and that's why it's so difficult for them to even self-identify that they're a victim, and to break that cycle. They're so attached to it because they're looking to fill that void.
And why is Florida top on the list for the number of human trafficking victims?
I would say because it is a very tourist. We have our Gulf, the Atlantic, the ports, the tourist areas, convention centers, and it's just a draw.
It's very transient. It's absolutely transient, for sure.
And I also have heard big events like the Super Bowl, other large sporting events, that is something, when we have one of those large events here, that's something that perpetrators will target.
And malls too. Violators, this is what, in the book Pimpology, 48 Laws of the Game, written by a pimp, he says, why burn when you can turn? Some of the girls out on the North Trail that have been violated for years started at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 being violated. Now they look like addicts walking around lost and broken, so sometimes they're treated as addicts when they were victimized early, and now they're renegading on their own or have pimps that no one has been able to locate. So.
And talk about your program and how it works so well for these women who come in.
I think one really great thing about More to Life is that when the president held his all-day think tank to discuss how we can combat human trafficking, I was the keynote speaker at the White House, along with Polaris Project. We did an all-day think tank. And so for More to Life, we work with about 1,500 youth, high risk and victims every year. We work with adult and women. We have an educational curriculum. We have a residential facility. We have mental behavior health and med management for those that need it. And a lot of really fun activities that cause individuals to be forward thinking about destiny and future and living again.
Well, you're helping give them a future. And ladies, thank you so much for being so passionate about this and helping all of these victims here on the Suncoast and in Florida.